Moana 2 is doing fantastic at the box office and it is setting records. However, the interesting thing is there's an article out of the Hollywood Reporter contemplating whether or not this movie, making lots of money despite its review scores, might actually be up for getting an Oscar. Is Moana 2 an Oscar-worthy film? Let's talk about that here on That Park Place. Hello, I am Jonas J. Campbell, an investigative reporter for That Park Place, and here with me is movie watcher, Mr. VashSky. Vash, you doing all right today?
I am doing just fine. Looking over the box office numbers for the weekend right here, it was a tremendous box office from what we understand, at least in the Thanksgiving frame, but one film in particular rises above the rest. Perhaps that lifts all tides? Maybe that goes along with our actual video,
That's true.
Movie that we're going to cover.
I think one of the records this weekend, it's one of the largest Thanksgivings ever right here. This one, Luis Fernando, overseas actuals for Moana 2 came a bit lower, but domestic coming much higher, makes it beat Frozen 2's 358.2 million and the Super Mario Brothers movie's 375.6 million, even more as biggest global opening of all time for animation at the box office after Tsunamic 163.85 day opening overseas over 48 markets. Tsunamic, what a word right there. If we go over here, Moana 2, all the box office records that have been broken, this by Anthony D'Alessandro from Deadline. Moana 2 proved once again after Universal's Wicked that musicals aren't dead on the big screen. It doesn't matter if they're animated or not. What's funny is I don't count this as a musical, one, because I've listened to the soundtrack and I don't count this as a musical. And two, it's a Disney movie, which I kind of consider a category all on its own. Now, we were predicting that this film would, we reported on the prediction that this would make more than 100 million in the opening weekend, and it did, but we did say that it would fall short in one or two areas. I think I'm willing to walk that back a little bit here and say that this is probably going to make more than $1 billion. And depending on how much Disney made to refit this Disney Plus series into a movie, I think this one will actually be profitable for them, which is not common for their animated features. They generally make their animated films in order to create a brand, in order to market it through consumer products and at the parks. And it's not really an issue of whether or not they make dollars from actual ticket sales. But let's look at these records here. Domestic, highest 5-day opening of all time, highest Thanksgiving weekend of all time by far, highest Thanksgiving Day view by far, best Thanksgiving Day take, highest ever Black Friday at the box office, record opening for a Walt Disney animation movie, beating Frozen 2's 130.3 million, best preview figure ever for a Walt Disney animation title, best ever Tuesday for Disney before Thanksgiving, second highest preview figure for an animated movie behind Incredibles 2. First time a Hollywood star had 2 #1 openings in a calendar month. Oh, that's funny because the Red One was released the same month and was technically a #1 film at the box office. But the less said about that film, the better. Second best 3-day opening for Dwayne Johnson. Fourth highest opening for a musical. And that's before you even get to the worldwide and international figures here. But this is not really what we're wanting to talk about here, because this is not the most interesting thing, because we could put out a thing that says Moana made a bunch of money, and that would technically be correct, and that would be fine. Moana 2, made a bunch of money. But here's the one that I really, really want to talk about. Big box office weekend for Moana 2 could also spill into Oscars. This from Steven Zychik and Pamela McClintock over there at the Hollywood Reporter, which, by the way, owned by the same company as Deadline. Moana 2's historic weekend at the box office is not only filling Disney's coffers, but bolstering its case for an Oscar nomination. Vash, you think this one's going to get an Oscar?
Wait, hang on. Let's see. And the Oscar for following Bob Iger's directive goes to, I don't know, perhaps, if that's the Oscar that we're talking about here. But beyond that, I don't know what Oscar nomination that this film receives. See, here's the big thing about Moana 2. As successful as it is in the box office, and yes, monetarily, it is very successful, and I think you might be right there, Jonas. It might actually make $1 billion. We'll have to see what that second weekend performance shows that drop there. I think my biggest concern regarding Moana 2 is its quality, and I think that perception is out there. I believe it received an A- cinema score, which is quite low for animation, I will say. If you see like the critics' reviews, for example, on Rotten Tomatoes, they have been very unkind to this film generally overall. And I just think about like Frozen 2, for example, right? Where that film came out and wasn't as beloved as Frozen 1. And I think that dampened enthusiasm for the overall brand going forward. So when they hear like Frozen 3 or 4, for example, I think a lot of people end up rolling their eyes because the enthusiasm may have cooled, let's say, for that whole thing.
Right.
I can kind of see the same effect happening here. So, like Oscars, it's like, well, I mean, it's kind of like, to me, it's like there's a like a little saying in NFL, playoffs. You know, we're trying to win a game.
I remember that clip.
Right? In this way, it's like Oscars, you know, is the quality sufficient to even get there? I'm not sure it is. And I think the franchise, the brand, and enthusiasm might be impacted by this film.
Right. I think that Moana 2, I think Film Threat put it really well. If you have a child in the single digits and they don't know what Disney movies should be like, then Moana 2 is probably a movie that they will be excited to see. But once you get to that 10 years old and above, if they're aware of the music of other Disney films, including Moana, which, you know, if you look at Can I Get a Chi-Hu versus You're Welcome, it's very clear what the difference is here in the quality, or at least it is to me. Maybe I'm a snob or something like that. But if you look at some of these reviews here, they are saying as consensus, Moana 2 isn't as inspired as the original, but still delights as a colorful adventure. That's not what I'm hearing from many places. This is very low for a Rotten Tomato score for a Disney film, 64%, with a 87% popcorn meter. If you go over here, there used to be a thing where they would break it out by top critics versus all critics, and they would very clearly tell you, well, if you switch over here to top critics, that'll tell you the percentage of top critics that have it. But despite stunning animation and a standout musical performance by young Mr. or Mrs. Fraser, Moana 2 drowns in exposition and shallow storytelling that sacrifices character development for franchise building aspirations. The lingering goodwill of the beloved 2016 original could be enough to make this worth the price of admission. Even the most Disney-fied family members will have trouble remembering much about it by the time the credits are done rolling. Now, we obviously on either that Park Place, or actually maybe we did it on both channels. We there was a review from Sean Chandler, I think his name is. His daughter talked about how difficult it was to follow the plot of the movie because it didn't quite make sense. Of course, we go over here to Metacritic, which is more of a, this is not an average of yeses and nos. This is an average altogether. Puts Moana 2 at a 57. But over here at Hollywood Reporter, they think that this is in the rarefied area. They want to know if this thing is getting itself an Academy Award. By the way, an Academy Award that the entire category, it could be argued that John Lasseter is the reason that this category even exists. Let's see what they have to say. In recent years, major animation hits such as Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, The Boy and the Heron, and Toy Story 4 have all been, oh my goodness. If did Toy Story 4 get Best Animated Feature?
I thought Toy Story 3 might have.
Well, Toy Story 3 probably deserves it because Toy Story 3 is somehow an excellent third movie in the trilogy of Toy Story films.
Now I remember. Toy Story 3 received the Best Picture category, I believe. And it was that and Up that, kind of built the Best Animated Picture category.
Well, and Up is great in my opinion. I love curmudgeonly old men who learn to get through their cynicism there, because the real adventure was the life that he had the entire time. To know that he was good enough for his wife, that's great. That's a great message at the end of the film, even though you never really get to meet Ellie or Elsie. I always get those two mixed up. First, Moana was nominated for Best Animated Feature, however, after its release in 2016. But experts have seen that as a more slippery proposition this year with The Wild Robot, Inside Out 2, Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Most Foul, Memoir of a Snail, and Piece by Piece, helping to make an unusually deep and diverse year for animated films. There is some diversity here, although this being stop motion animation with Wallace and Gromit, it could be computer generated stop motion. I don't know. And of course, Piece by Piece, which is a Pharrell biopic told as a Lego movie. I haven't watched that one, but they at least acknowledge the fact that this film is not scoring as well on Rotten Tomatoes. I think it's patently ridiculous to say that this film, which is not a film, this is corporate product,
Yes.
would be nominated for Best Animated Feature. I think this, to me, this is either the Oscars trying to stay relevant if they decide to nominate this film, or this is giving up on the category altogether. This is not a film that belongs in any Best Feature. Definitely not for Best Song, because there is nothing in this soundtrack that is even rises to the level of Fathoms Below. That's the song I keep bringing up. And there are people in the audience who know exactly what I'm talking about, and that is about 3 people. And everyone else goes, "What is that from?" It's the opening song from Little Mermaid that you cannot remember the words to. You remember the basic idea that it's a sea shanty, and that's about it. So
Oof.
the big number from Moana 2 is about that level of song craftsmanship. It's fine, it's inoffensive, but in the end, it's just kind of vague. I'm sorry, I don't want to insult Fathoms Below too much by saying my thoughts on Beyond. Barlow and Bear, they did a pretty good job for not having much time. I'll say that. Vash, do you think that Moana 2 is going to get an Oscar for storytelling?
Not for storytelling, I don't think. No. I guess Toy Story 4 did receive the Oscar for Best Animated Film. I believe in the 92nd Oscars that it received it. So I don't know. I guess the bar's pretty low. Perhaps. Cartoon Brew actually brought this out here in their review roundup. Review roundup critics label it as boring and confusing corporate product. So again, Jonas, using your exact verbiage right there to describe this whole piece, and you can see that reflected in the audience scores as well. At least if you're picking through the reviews, you can see that the same issues keep popping up over and over again for this film for people who might have had issues with it. It's all right. I don't get the purpose of this little sister being there. The plot is all over the place. Made me confused. Like, is the lady supposed to be good or evil? Why didn't they just, the lady tell Maui her plan? Was the purpose of the little sister? Again, the songs are nothing compared to the first movie, to be honest. When I saw Moana when I was 9 or 10, I remember how the music was stuck in my head, and I love the little songs. But here, the music was just bland, and you can tell that they tried to copy from the first. They didn't do too great of a job. Since I grew up with this movie, it makes me a little sad how they handled my childhood like this. We see these reviews over and over again for people who might have had issues with this specific piece. And I think the professional or top critics reflected that in their reviews. I think the Oscars might snip that out as well.
Right. Also pointing out that the Oscars, do you know what channel has the Oscars this year, Vash?
I believe it's ABC.
And who owns ABC?
Ooh, I think it's Disney.
Yeah. I'm not saying that they're involved in any way, but they sure do like to schmooze. One thing, Bob Iger, if you're listening to this right now, Moana 2 getting the Oscar for Best Animated Feature, I think it would make more sense, and this is really right up your alley. Just go ahead and give it to Black Panther, even though that came out in 2018 and is technically not an animated film, although there are some very heavy animation sequences in that film. For anyone who thinks that's a bizarre idea, well, I think the idea of Moana 2 getting the Oscar for Best Animated Picture is about as ridiculous as giving it to Black Panther in 2024. But that being said, we want to throw this to our commenters. What else do you think might be a better pick for Best Animated Feature? Or do you think that Moana 2 will actually get it? Vash, do you have one there?
Wild Robot.
Wild Robot. Well, It is an amazing film, that Wild Robot, also done by a former Disney animator, obviously a Disney legend, Chris Sanders. And when I say legend, I mean it lowercase. They probably haven't admitted how legendary Chris Sanders is in animation at this point. Man, that's a great film. And I'm sure they're going to do a sequel. Well, we have yet to see whether or not Chris Sanders will be attached to that one. But that being said, drop your comments below. Like this video if you like this video. By that, I mean, hey, if you could go hit that like button, especially for a person that doesn't usually do it, really help us out. And of course, if you haven't done that, consider subscribing to That Park Place for all the news that should be fun.
Thanks for watching That Park Place News. For more information, consider checking out www.thatparkplace.com. And don't forget to subscribe, share, like, and send this out on your favorite social media accounts.